Faffing, defined by the Urban Dictionary as to aimlessly waste time doing useless tasks. Example, stop faffing around and come to bed.
Hello, and welcome to Faffing with Friends. I'm Ivaylo.
I'm Joe.
And this is Lawrence.
And today, lads, we're going to be talking about a topic that is very near and dear to our hearts, and that is pets, animals, the animal kingdom in general. So, yeah, just give me your thoughts about owning pets, having pets, your interactions with animals, all that kind of good stuff. Go, go, go.
Well, I feel like it's a very relevant idea to the current state of things, with everyone being locked up in their houses because of the pandemic. I think a lot of people that otherwise wouldn't even consider the idea of a pet have been, giving it a long thought. Because I believe in these kinds of situations, pets serve two incredibly useful purposes. The first one is the obvious one, which is companionship. If you're stuck alone with no friends or family, a pet can keep you company and it can bring you the kind of joy, socially that you might be missing completely at this point. But also the other one that you see fewer people really think about. When you get depressed during times like this, it's a lot harder when the only person you're taking care of is yourself. But having a pet means you have more of a reason to wake up in the morning. Like, if you have a dog, you're taking the dog for walks. If you have a cat, you need to feed it and play with it. And animals provide you a greater purpose than just self-preservation during a time where probably, the depression of being isolated for so long is affecting the way you'd usually go about your day-to-day.
Yeah.
Yeah, and pet ownership has skyrocketed a lot due to lockdown. Even though before that, we already had about 51% of the population owning pets, which is a staggering number if you think about it. About, I think, 10 million cats and 11 million dogs in the UK are pets. But, obviously before lockdown, pets were a great way to socialize, but you'd take your dog to the dog park and you'd meet a few other dog owners, but nowadays that's much more difficult.
I mean, personally, when I go to the park, even now, you still get, a lot of people walking their dogs, and I think you can tell that it's one of the few activities they can maintain somewhat, because they have to. You're not going to get a choice whether you walk your dog or not. You're going outside and you're doing it, and if you go to a park, your dog at least can socialize with other dogs. You see them playing around in my park all the time.
Yeah, and especially right now when you have all these ideas of, what's considered an essential task. Like, especially with, I don't know if you guys heard, but we are probably going to get another lockdown incoming anytime soon. So they are saying that you're going to be only allowed to go out for, like, essential tasks like shopping. And obviously owning a pet, as Lawrence mentions, it is an essential task for you to be able to go and take your dog out for a walk. Because what is it going to do? It's just going to, like, not go out. So yeah, it's a great way, as you mentioned, to like find the motivation to get out of bed in the morning and to just like go and do an essential task, because that's one of the only things you are allowed to do in this current climate. Just having a pet is almost, would you say having a pet is an essential necessity of like surviving a lockdown or any?
I mean, I think for a lot of people it could very well, give them the boost mental health wise, morale wise to try a bit harder, when they're feeling down, to have more of a reason to try to get through this really difficult time. I think it does provide that for a lot of people. And I know a lot of people who do have pets, currently are probably doing a lot better than those such as myself, which, are stuck completely on their own for most of the day.
Or none of us on this podcast have pets there, by the way. So we are just all sitting here just talking about what it's like to have a pet, not actually having any pets of our own. But yeah.
We did used to have pets before, which we'll get to later. But yeah, unless you count sea monkeys, which don't really count, none of us do have pets at the moment.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, plus I've always thought the main reason I don't have one is not like lack of wanting one. It's while I've been living in London, it's always been small apartments, stuffy, not a lot of space. And I always thought it would be almost unfair to have like a dog cooped up in an area like this, maybe even a cat. I'd feel bad not having a garden or at least a slightly bigger area to let them out in and, let them get some of that energy burned off other than just the few times you walk a dog a day. To me, it's always seemed like you just you shouldn't have one.
That's a really
otherwise.
fascinating point, because you are bringing in the main inconveniences of having a pet and owning a pet in the big city. Because as we mentioned, all these positives about owning pets and having pets, getting the dog or like any pet is quite easy. It's incredibly easy nowadays to just like get a puppy, for example. They're always up for adoption. Some people are even gifting them away. And you can always buy a purebred if that's what you want to do with your money. But again, as you mentioned, there are huge limitations in, for example, in London, because as you mentioned, space is a huge factor. Or see, like me, I don't think that space is going to be a big issue for my pet if I ever do get a pet in this house. But you then have to deal with, for example, we're renting, so you do have to deal with the landlords, and you do have to deal with the agencies, and some of them only allow a certain type of dog, like a very small breed. Others, like my wonderful landlords, do not allow any pets at all. So
yeah, there's also even the problem of, dogs especially are sometimes very noisy, and if you're living in like
absolutely.
an apartment block, an apartment building where you have neighbors really close by
Absolutely.
and the walls aren't exactly the thickest in the world, you're risking noise complaints, you're risking, people getting annoyed at the dog, even though, can't really do much. It's a dog.
It's super ironic because both my neighbors, we've got two other families in this complex. Both of the families have dogs. We're the only family in this apartment complex without any dogs. So, irony is nice, I guess.
We used to have neighbors here 2 doors down who had a dog. At night, they would lock it out in the garden, which was horrific by any standards. And around 3 or 4 a.m., would always wake up to, this horrendous barking because this dog was cold and scared, probably. We tried to talk to the neighbors to get this issue sorted. They didn't. The funny thing is, one day, an RSPCA volunteer knocked on our door, just, looking for donations and just talking about pets in general. And that was at the time when I had a pet. But what I wanted to tell her about was the dog next door, which I did. And in about 2 weeks, the problem was solved.
That's beautiful.
It's great that, that got resolved, but it's sad that it actually took 2 years for that to happen, because I tried to get to the council. They didn't really pay much attention to me at the time, but RSPCA did. Thank you, RSPCA.
Yeah, no, I've always felt that it's tragic when you see bad pet owners. That's one of the things that really does get to me. It makes me a little angry because, you're already forcing these animals to live with you in an apartment if you're in the city, which is usually not the environment they'd probably enjoy being in the most, but to also treat them badly, that's just, it's like a cherry on top of like this animal's already just doing what it can to, make you feel better because you wanted a pet. So mistreating it is just kind of pathetic.
I'm very glad you brought that point, because we did mention how during lockdown and during 2020, ownership of pets has absolutely skyrocketed, right? Because obvious reasons, pandemic, COVID, people need their comforts. It's now approaching a time where 2021 is finished and we are suddenly seeing the absolute fallout of that mass adoption and that mass on those mass sales, because right now we are seeing a record number of people just giving up and abandoning their pets. It's almost like the whole thing we get every Christmas. You buy your kids a pet for Christmas, and then by February it's already back in the shelter because people realize, oh no, like, oh shit, this is like, we have a responsibility not just for like a few months but for life, or for the duration of the dog's life.
I think it's a big problem how few people properly think about like what having an animal involves, and because they underestimate it, don't do their research, etc., they sometimes will adopt one, and like you said, they'll end up in a shelter quickly after.
Absolutely.
And it's
tragic.
The worst case scenario. Yeah,
I mean, there are a lot of legal obligations that we must follow for pet ownership and just animal welfare in general. A lot of people just don't do the research, and even when they do adopt a pet, they don't know how to take care of it. Some people don't even get it insured or chipped or neutered. And it's horrible for the pet, especially once it's abandoned or just given up to.
Yeah, and I mean, like you just mentioned, like chipping animals and stuff. Yeah, no, in England, especially in London as well, I've seen a lot of cats that were clearly someone's pet because they're not feral; they're like very domesticated, but they could have run off and they're not chipped, so no one can find them. And that's a really sad idea. Just having all these stray cats that were, belonged to someone, but because they didn't bother, doing their research, knowing that you have to get them, chipped and insured and all that, and getting them a good collar with their name on it or address or something, you have all these pets that will get lost in a city because cities are mazes, and even animals, can get lost in one, even with their, natural territorial instincts. And you just have this problem happen constantly, and that could be avoided very easily.
Absolutely.
You do have to consider the fact that also the size and scale of London, it's just a huge metropolis, and, it's just the fact that it's quite a busy and quite a loud city. So it's not really, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a city that's, like, made for you to have pets and dogs. Like, we have all the complaints every single year around November, which is, like, bonfire night and all the fireworks. And people have called for fireworks in recent years to be banned. Yeah, because there are a huge number of pets, and just the whole hustle and bustle of London city life, it doesn't give you the predisposition to own a pet or to make the pet feel as comfortable as it is, because I know people who have changed houses just so they can have a garden for their dog, and because, again, the whole metropolitan idea of, like, London doesn't really permit, like, you need a nice area, a nice rural area where you can take your dog out, where you can be with your dog to, like, make sure it has a good life, man. Just don't give your dog extra stress or anxiety, So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I've always been lucky enough to live near parks where I've lived. So, like, as long as you have that, at least, that's a plus. But there are places in London where, you might not have that. So, yeah, if you don't have a garden or anything else, it's going to be a lot tougher to own the kind of animal that wants to go out in nature and have a bit of freedom and get walks.
You have a full forest, man. Don't complain. You have a full forest.
Yeah, that's true.
So, we've talked about the negatives of obviously trying, so, but as we say, like, luckily there are a lot of parks in London where you can take your puppy to play or just for a nice relaxing walk. What is your thoughts on, obviously you mentioned on all the different requirements that are required to having a pet, so what do you guys think are some of these? Why do people don't do them, as you mentioned? Like, why do some people just don't chip or don't vaccinate their pets,
They're being lazy because it's easier just to not do any of those things. It's easier not to get pet insurance. It's easy not to just look after the pet because if, God forbid, anything happens to the pet, those people would probably just go and get another one and replace it. Easy peasy for them, But that's horrible, and actually that's illegal. That has legal consequences. It's a criminal offence if you don't look after your pets the way you're supposed to.
Yeah. Or another big problem is just they're being stupid. They've adopted an animal without doing any of the research, and they didn't know that. Because all this does cost a good chunk of money. Like, if you're going to adopt an animal, you need not just the toys and the food you're going to have to buy them from now on. You need to have insurance for the animal, so if it gets hurt or if it gets sick, you can actually afford its healthcare. You need to have, a chip, which does cost money to get. You need to have a good, collar. That getting a personalized one is best because then people can check the collar if your animal gets lost or runs away, and they can easily get back to you.
Yeah. What is your guys' opinions on owning pets and having children? Because, for example, I've a personal story of mine. When I was born, my mum used to have a cat. And me and the cat, apparently, when I was a baby, we had a wonderful relationship, which I can't tell you about because I simply don't remember it. Unfortunately, the cat passed away before I can remember. So, what do you guys think? Because a lot of people that I know would say, "Oh no, we're gonna have a kid, so we have to, for example, abandon the pet or give the pet away." Do you guys think that? Obviously, a lot of people have pets and children at the same time, but you should always consider the risks, right? You should always never leave a kid with a dog, for example, you should never leave a baby just with the dog itself, so.
I had back in Romania when I grew up, I had a dog for as long as I can remember. My parents had one by the time I was, old enough to know what a dog is and to interact with it. And then later on, when, I got my own dog, and I've had it, till it passed away. But yeah, no, I grew up with one, and I think it was a really good experience. I think as, having kids, giving them that kind of companion, especially if they get along and they, develop a proper good relationship, a dog and a child can be, near inseparable. Like, I know I loved pets growing up. I loved my dog, and I'd play with him any chance I got. I loved just feeding him or getting him water because it made me feel more adult when I was little, taking care of the dog, learning to be more responsible as a result.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, my dad grew up in a village, so he was very familiar. He had pets. He had a German Shepherd. He also had a pet lamb, which he grew up with, but also eventually ate, because that was the reality of living in a village back then. And if you owned a pet that was livestock, so he was very used to that. But my mum, on the other hand, is allergic. Not only is she allergic, but she also has a phobia of dogs. So I never had a chance of growing up with any felines or canines, but as I grew up, I had a lot of goldfish, but I also had a lot of chicks. It was very common to have chicks as pets, little chicks. And I had one that grew up to be a rooster. I was very fond of that, and I had to give it away before we moved here. I also enjoyed that. It was a very different experience to what Lawrence just described, but in a similar way, I really enjoyed it, and I absolutely, if you know how to take care of a pet, and if you can do it, and if you're having a child, absolutely go for it, because it's good for the child as it grows up. It's good for the family in general, and as the pet grows up with a kid, it'll know the child. It will grow up with it. It will form a different bond with the child than it would probably with you and your partner.
Yeah. So
yeah, and I think we all have quite unique experiences with animals as opposed to someone who's grown up their whole life in a city, because as you mentioned, you had farmyard animals as pets too, in a sense, and I also grew up on a farm. So I had a lot of different livestock around me all the time. We had a donkey, we had cows for milking, we had chickens, roosters, sheep. So I did, and pigs as well. So I grew up around a lot of different animals, and you did, growing up on a farm, consider them pets as much as you did anything else. Because, it was a small rural farm, so they grew up with you. You'd have them around a very long time. You'd have to wait until they were really old, and then you'd slaughter them if that was, the kind of animal it was. And it was a really interesting experience. I think a lot of people I've met here in England will never really be able to have that same experience, because there's just so little of that here, especially in the metropolitan areas. You never see anyone, with very unconventional pets most of the time. You don't really see pigs or chickens most of the time.
I suggest we put a poll to our listeners if they want us to rename this Faffing with Farmers. I think that's going to be quite wonderful in the future. But I'm very glad that you bring the cultural differences of obviously living in Romania and living on a farm to the concept of the big city. As you mentioned, a lot of the people we know would not know the experiences of living around so many animals. I personally can't speak for myself, because I never did live on a farm, but I certainly know what you mean, and I certainly know all the cultural differences of living in Eastern Europe, which is quite the rural area, and just being surrounded by animals and having all these weird rituals and traditions when it comes to animals. For example, in Bulgaria, on every 2nd of February, you have to apparently, if you have a son, if you have a big, strong man, you have to kill a rooster for their health. Okay, I don't know why that's a thing. It's
so
apparently
it's like a rite of
thing.
passage.
Yeah, it's like a rite of passage, but you just have to kill a rooster. I'm okay, that's actually happens. It's a thing that's happened because it's a tradition. And some of these traditions are really, really backwards. And again, they really just highlight the different relationship and the different ideas people can get. There is a horrible, absolutely deplorable ritual in Bulgaria, which is called dog spinning. And the less said about dog spinning, the better. But for those of you that don't know, dog spinning is a ritual which is apparently practiced against rabies, where the poor dog is tied up in a rope and just spun in a circle. And it is just a horrible form of animal cruelty. It is absolutely despicable. But yeah, again, it's quite a huge difference, and it's quite a contrasting difference to what we have here. So I just want to pose a question. So where do you guys draw the line? Because obviously, people are going to say, so you're allowed to have pets, but then stuff like chicken and stuff like cows, we obviously consume, because none of us on this podcast are vegan or vegetarian. So where do you guys draw the line? The infamous question,
I mean, for me, it's quite simple. Back on the farm, we only slaughtered an animal when it was getting old or, not really living a very good life anymore. Because again, we weren't like a commercial farm. We were a small farm. It was pretty much for us that we had the livestock. So it'd be, I've seen, a pig get slaughtered. I've seen chickens get slaughtered. And it was always only when it's necessary, only when you need the food, only when, they were getting to the end of their lives. Because otherwise, like, all these animals produce stuff you needed anyway.
Absolutely, yeah,
because again, we weren't commercial. Like, all the chickens would make eggs, and that was great for us because we needed that for food. It would save us money. We'd have food constantly, fresh breakfasts. But yeah, no, I think that's where you draw the line. Like you mentioned, that ritualistic, almost traditional, like, killing of a rooster for a young. That's, to me, seems, a bit outdated and stupid.
Absolutely. All those rituals.
Like, having grown up, I just learned to value animals. Like, I value them for everything they are. Like, livestock animals on the farm. Yeah, they were livestock, but I also loved them.
Yeah.
I loved all of them. I loved the chickens. I loved the donkey. I loved the cows and the pigs. But I knew at some point, they would get used for food because we needed food and we weren't exactly rich. So we couldn't just always afford to buy more food where we lived.
So you've never had a moment where you're just like, you know what? Today I'm feeling chicken. I'm going to go and kill this chicken. Like, you don't feel that, do you?
Not really, no. Because, all the livestock you had to have gotten either bought or raised. And you sort of learn to value it a lot more that way, I feel, because you're not just going to this, supermarket and going, today I feel like chicken.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're going, we have so many chickens. We've spent years raising them. If I kill this chicken, that's one less chicken we're going to have, less eggs. We're going to have to raise another one, buy a new one,
Yeah, absolutely.
You can absolutely form a relationship or, consider farmyard animals as companions, even if at some point you end up having to slaughter them. But you can form that bond, because I know farmers who know cows by their names and they know exactly what, mannerisms each one has. They can tell each one by those mannerisms. For me, it is veganuary, but for me, I don't know where I draw the line, because I did have farmyard animals as pets. I've also had normal animals like cats as pets. So long as, you can, obviously you can't have a horse in the city as a pet.
Yeah.
Maybe at a stables, you can go visit it and go for a ride, but you can't, just bring it into your house and domesticate it like a cat you would. So obviously you have to draw a sensible line, but, like Lauren said, it's very feasible to form a sort of bond of companionship with any animal, especially on a farm.
I mean, we didn't really have horses, but the donkey I mentioned, I did, like, he had a name. And when I was little and I wasn't too heavy, because I was a child, he'd let me ride him around. And yeah, like, I really loved that donkey. Yeah. He's a really good memory of when I was young, because that was incredibly fun. And it made me grow up. This is something I've noticed, especially in London. There are a lot of people who are inherently scared of animals here. And growing up around so many different ones and not seeing them as something dangerous inherently because of just unfamiliarity, I think, has really helped me. Because you see a lot of people here who are scared of, even domesticated animals for the most part. They'll avoid them. They'll change lanes on the street, while walking down the sidewalk just to not walk close to animals. And it's really weird seeing how fearful a lot of people are of animals when I grew up with such, way scarier, arguably, animals around me. Like, I had full-grown cows and bulls. If I was dumb, they could have actually harmed me.
See, that's the thing. I do think that in here in London, there is a great sense of, just having domesticated animals. In Bulgaria, where I grew up, for example, we have a huge, huge problem with stray animals. And sometimes, especially in the winter, when those dogs get hungry, and I can tell you, man, I've been scared of dogs for a while back in Bulgaria. They are scary dogs, especially the strays. But in here, I've never felt as scared of, like, a dog or a cat, simply because I know they're domesticated, I know they're fed, I know they're taken care of. But I kind of get your point, but at the same time, I kind of don't, because I've also been in that situation where sometimes a dog would just bark at me and I would just get these horrible flashbacks of stray rabid dogs back in Bulgaria, which do exist and are a huge problem. And man, I'm really not painting a good picture of Bulgaria when it comes to animals, am I? Like, I am just shitting on it.
I can back you up a little here, because in Romania, especially where I grew up, we also had, like, roving packs of stray or wild dogs.
Absolutely.
But that was the problem with that it was a problem caused by people.
Yes.
It was people throwing away their dogs or not raising them or not properly taking them to a shelter or anything. They'd build up and you'd get these packs of, like, really odd, different mixes of breeds and stuff of just roving wild dogs. And now I also have, like, a horror story when I was little. I was riding this little scooter, like the little scooters you ride that you push with your foot.
Yeah.
I never had anything else other than that. I didn't really have a bike for a long time when I was little, but I had a little scooter, and I remember I was riding it just between my house and, like, the town center. And this one dog that was just sitting in the bushes watching me at some point just started chasing me. And I was so scared. I legitimately dropped the scooter, started booking it on foot because it wasn't fast enough on the scooter, lost like a shoe while running because of how scared I was, got to my friend's house and just scaled his fence and jumped inside.
Yeah.
That dog was like a good 10 meters behind me by the time I got to the gate. And he could have absolutely just done some real damage.
Yeah.
But again, I think the problem with that is that's a problem caused by people
Indeed.
being very irresponsible.
Exactly. And again,
Fortunately-
to mention your... Sorry, go on, Joe. Go on.
Thanks. Sorry about that. Fortunately, I've never had that problem. I always approach pets, dogs or cats I meet on the streets. Usually the cats are not with their owners, but the dogs are. When I was younger, when I was living on the estate back in Sheffield, there was a stray dog. There was a stray golden retriever, which is just suddenly became my favorite breed after that. Around our estate, which me and one of my friends, who I kind of had a crush on, back then, we kind of adopted. We called it Max, as you would, and we used to play with it a lot. And I love that dog. I don't know whatever happened to it because he just vanished one day. And as you say, it's a problem that people make. And we lived very close to farms. Almost all my life, I've lived very near to farms. When I was younger, like up to the age of 7, I lived literally opposite a farm. And back in Sheffield, we were very close to Graves Park and, other farms and so on. And obviously, it's not so much of a problem here. I don't see so much strays in London, especially not cats
Also,
or dogs.
I think when you see strays in London, they're not as dangerous and they're not as like
not as feral.
they're not as brave because the problem there, back in the countryside is they're the kind of animals that when they're abandoned, they have to learn to live in like actual wild areas. They're not scavenging the city trash from restaurants or anything.
Yeah.
So they become a lot more aggressive and like legitimately terrifying if you let it get to that point.
So, to mention, you obviously mentioned it's a people problem, and I absolutely agree, but how many times I personally have had this done to me many times. I would go ask for my parents for a dog when I was younger, and the biggest response I would usually get is, "Oh, we don't have the financial means for it." So again, especially in places like Romania and Bulgaria, or wherever you are, and if you simply don't have the financial means to maintain a pet's lifestyle, because let's face it, sometimes they do require maintenance and they do just require your attention and finances. So how does financial dependency determine the relationship with your pets? Like, again,
see, for me, I think it was quite weird because the reason I ever had pets growing up, other than the farm animals, was my grandparents had this massive canine, I think, wolf mix, which was literally a guard dog. But me and him got along really well, so I'd play with it.
Yeah.
But it was a dog that if it stood on its hind legs, it was taller than both my fully grown parents.
Jeez.
And it was just this massive beast of an animal. Because I'd grown up around it, it didn't see me as, any sort of threat. So me and it always got along, and I loved that dog. Even though if anyone saw me playing with it who lives here, they'd probably enter a panic. But the other reason I had a dog was because the problem, like we said, in the countryside especially, is you get a lot of litters of dogs and people don't know what to do with them. So when a member of my family had their dog make a litter, they were just giving puppies to whoever was willing to take one, so they didn't have to throw them in a shelter or out on the street or whatever. So I took one just from a family member. It didn't really cost anything other than maintaining it after, which we could do anyway because we always had scraps of our own food that we would feed it. It wasn't exactly a pet food available where we lived, so it just ate what we ate. Scraps of what was left. It would eat soup, it would eat meat, whatever we had, just the bones from our food. So financially wise, because I've never owned one here, where it does require a lot more of a monetary strain, I never really felt that problem with having a pet. But I can absolutely see how here it's way worse, because you need insurance for their health. You're not going to find a local vet who knows about animals who's just willing to look at it like you would back where I come from. There's a lot of things that I had back there that aren't here.
Right. And I wouldn't say it costs much either. I mean, I had a cat for a while until it unfortunately very tragically passed away. But it doesn't actually cost that much to look after, especially if you start off with a cat. Like, I was once told by someone that if you ever want to, own a pet, start off with a cat. They're a good starter pet because they're pretty low maintenance. They can look after themselves if you raise them well enough. And so long as, their food is prepared, they have litter to, do their business, and you don't let them stray too far, which unfortunately my family let that happen. But if you can take care of the pet pretty well, then it shouldn't really be too much of a maintenance issue, especially financially. Dogs maybe, it depends on the breed, especially with cats. Obviously, if you've got a really sophisticated breed that requires a lot of attention, then maybe. Same with dogs or any other pet. But if you really want to just have a pet just for companionship, first of all, it's worth the financial sacrifices that you have to make if you're going for it. If you've done your research and you've decided, okay, this is what I want to do. But it's not really that much in comparison to, I don't know.
I think it's important you again brought up research, because that also really depends on specific breeds, like you mentioned, but also not just because some require more attention. Some have diseases that are, much more common in certain breeds. So if you get a pure breed, they're a lot more likely to suffer from a lot of stuff. Mixed breeds or mutts usually won't have to deal with. So you always have to think of those risks as well. If you're getting, a dog specifically, is this dog I'm going to get very likely to get sick? If they get sick, how exactly do I handle that? How much would it cost, etc.?
Absolutely. And I do think that I'm glad you guys mentioned it, that, it is worth it. All the sacrifices you do make, both financially and in any other shape, they're absolutely worth it to have a pet. But from what I'm seeing is that there is a huge cultural difference between, for example, owning a pet in London and owning a pet, for example, back in Bulgaria. As we mentioned before, all the problem with the strays is because I don't feel like, me personally, I don't really know about that many animal shelters in Bulgaria. People usually, they would just literally just throw the dog out in the streets. That's a thing that I've seen happen. That's a thing that I know to be a fact. But I'm glad that at least in London there is a whole culture around, if you don't need a dog, or if you're trying to get a dog in the same way, you always go to a shelter. You always go through the right channels in a way. I haven't seen anyone in London at least just dump their dog on the streets for it to become a stray. I'm sure it's happened. I'm not saying it's exclusive to Eastern Europe, but I'm pretty sure that in London the culture is to just, if you can't.
Yeah, it's not just the culture, I agree, but it's also just availability. Like you mentioned,
yes.
If you have to even think of dog shelters back where we lived, you'd have to go to one of the big cities, which is usually hours away to find one. Yeah. And that's one of the problems of why so many people would dump animals out on the street and there'd be so many strays, because there were no dog shelters for 50 miles in any direction.
What do you do?
Yeah.
And again, there was, on the whole benefits of pets thing, I genuinely do think that they also, apart from obviously the whole mental strength thing, I think that animals are great with helping with your physical endurance as well. For example, I would love to have a chance to exercise with a dog. I see people running in the parks with their dogs, and that's pretty much a dream of mine. I would love to just take my dog out to exercise with, which again has many health benefits, but decreased blood pressure, decreased cholesterol levels, all that kind of stuff. Just, with a pet, I feel like you're growing on all levels, man. Let's be honest. If you have a pet, you're growing on all levels as a human being. So yeah, that's pretty beautiful to me.
It's a great way to meet other people. The amount of times pets have become the conversation or the icebreaker when you meet someone, or you're out with your pet and someone else is out with their pet, and again, that's a chance to meet someone. And I've seen a lot on on dating sites and just generally social media, people saying stuff like, "If you have a pet, we're going to get along," or "I love my 7 cats and dogs," and stuff like that. So it's we're social animals, and so are these pets that we domesticated. And it does help, as you say, grow in every aspect.
Yeah, I think if I ever move apartments and have a place where, I have at least somewhat of a garden and I can keep a pet here while we live here, I would absolutely, get one. I'd love dogs. I would love to have one. And like I said, I've had a few over my life, even if one of them was my grandparents. One of them was mine, so I know how to take care of them. I know how to raise them, and I know just how much fun and how much happiness they can bring you. So I'd absolutely get one here for in the city if I just lived somewhere where it was more accommodating for me.
Yeah, what breed would you get?
I've thought about this a lot. I find I'm really a sucker for cute animals, man.
Yeah.
The tiny, cuter ones. Like if I see a corgi on the street, the way they walk and they shake their little butts, and it's just oh my god, you are the cutest creature on this earth. How is this possible?
The terrifying man that is Lawrence having a little corgi.
Listen, I love animals. Okay, that's
I
my weak
know.
point, and cute ones especially. Like, I just love cute animals.
Big softy you are. If I had a choice,
Yeah.
I would always see. I'm the polar opposite. I would go with the biggest dog I can possibly get. Like, your grandparents' dog, Lawrence, the one that you mentioned. That's the type of dog I would just like love.
Yeah,
to,
big canine.
I would love to get my hands on an Alaskan Malamute.
Oh yeah, Malamutes are huge.
They're beautiful dogs.
Those kinds of dogs, like man.
Saint Bernard are pretty big as well, or they can get.
Yeah, I get one of those.
Yeah.
Recreate the movie Cujo when it eats you.
And this is the thing. This is another point where I like massively disagree with my parents on it. So I have to wait until I'm way more independent.
Yeah,
they do say, "Oh well, you need to get." And again, that's a great point, which I now come back to. The bigger the dog, there's like the whole idea that the bigger the dog, the higher the maintenance, so bigger the financial cost. And, maybe it's true, like a bigger dog does require more food, does require more space. So, again, if you have more money, you're more susceptible to getting a bigger breed. But yeah, my parents have always been like, if you're getting a dog, you're gonna get like a tiny little dog. I'm like, well, no, I want a big dog. So, again, what do you guys think?
I think another thing you need to consider is also just shedding. Certain like breeds will shed so much. And if you're living in a house where, like Joe mentioned, if you have an allergic family member or an asthmatic family member, that can probably become hell for them if you get the kind of dog or a cat that sheds all year round.
Absolutely. But something we talked about before, Lawrence, was the fact that insurance companies consider whether you've got a dog as a pet or not, and that can actually have an effect on your premium. So that's another benefit. It kind of pays off for itself if you do get a dog. Especially, I mean,
yeah, I do think it's also like it makes sense. It is an indicator of you being a more responsible human being if you're taking care of another living animal or being.
I do also think that, like, for example, what would you say is the best pet to have in lockdown? What would you guys say is the best pet? We've already talked about everything.
Here's where I actually did think about this. So obviously the main you'd get, especially if you're a conventional person, is a cat or a dog. And out of those two specifically, I think a dog would be better because a cat does need its solitary time and it needs more independence and time away from you. And you can very much annoy or stress out cats if you are bored and constantly interacting with them, which does happen in lockdown, I'd assume a lot more than beforehand. So a dog would probably welcome the newfound all day long attention, more or less. Absolutely. Where you have nothing else to really do. So a dog's probably the best choice if you're looking for, which makes most sense in a lockdown scenario.
And they no longer have to wait for you to come back from work, which is absolutely adorable because they do actually just like wait for you. And then when you come back to work, I'm sure like Lawrence, you've owned a dog whenever you disappear and then you reappear, they're just like all over you, especially if it's been have you ever had a moment where obviously like, have you ever come back from Romania?
Well, actually, there was a time where I came, I came here, and then we returned to Romania, and literally it'd been a year, right? Like we couldn't travel for that time because we couldn't afford to go back. But when we came back, I got to the gate, I shouted the name of my dog the way I used to once, and he just flew at us. He like slammed into the gate, and it was just like, "Get in! I missed you."
There you go. We're being wholesome here, boys. We're being so very wholesome.
I
have a lot of really good stories.
Well, go on. We have the time. Right, go on, hit us.
Yeah,
there's one that I always enjoyed this. So because I was on a farm, right? Like obviously I was a kid, so I couldn't do much. I didn't really get the crazy jobs like go milk the cows or anything. But my grandparents would always like get me to scare off hawks and eagles.
Nice.
Because when our sheep would go out in the field, you'd have these like massive birds of prey just circling, and you just have to scream at them. I'd spend like half an hour to an hour just wailing at these birds in the sky to scare them off from our livestock, because otherwise they probably would have swooped down and just taken one of our sheep.
Yeah.
I also had to like scare off foxes from our chicken coop. so it was like I was a little guard for our farm, like this little bored child just ready for war with these predators in the wild coming to steal our animals.
So I do have that's a wonderful story, by the way. But I do have a topic which I would like us to address, which I found to be quite interesting. So, there is a prevalent notion that millennials and the generations after the millennials, we are opting for pets and not parenthood. I would like to hear your opinions on that little tidbit, because I know many people, wonderful people, who do prefer pets over having children.
Right.
So,
I mean,
take
I
it away.
don't judge someone for
No, I don't
making
judge
that
anyone.
decision.
I'm just saying it's a very interesting idea of, why are we doing this? Why are we opting for pets and not
Well,
children?
it's less consequential than having a child, and obviously it
Yeah.
costs way less to have a pet than it does to have a child. Fewer maintenance issues with a pet than a child. Like, you can't just take a child for a walk if it's, if it's growling at you, or if it's hungry, or, if it's got to go.
If
If it's growling at you.
If it's crying and if it's upset, you can't just get pet insurance for a child. It doesn't work like that. so it's easier to, look after a pet. It's easier because it doesn't talk back. It doesn't grow up and learn your language and get grumpy when it becomes a teenager, and then have to leave you when it's 18. So
there's the fact we all know how long every type of animal usually lives, right?
Yeah.
And with a child, this is the rest of your life.
Yes, yes.
You've made the dedication.
And that's not a
you're
bad thing.
Raising this kid, and no, but listen, right? with an animal, because you know the exact times, you actually get the choice of going, if I want a pet that lasts a large part of my life, because I do want that dedication anyway, you get like a dog, or you get, those parrots that live like 60 years.
Yeah.
You get, one of those animals that just will live as long as you, and you can have them
you
as
could
a
have
companion for
several
life.
generations of the same family of pets if you wanted to. Like, if you get 2 cats and they should just breed on end, and then you could have like 3 generations. That's what George R. R. Martin has got. He's had like 3 generations of cats, which is crazy, by the way, but it's still pretty interesting.
So what we're saying,
or you can opt for like an animal like a hamster that only lives like a year or 2, maybe less at
so
times.
we're saying if you want a lifelong pet, you get a child.
We're saying
Is that what we're going
usually
for here,
is-
boys?
What we're saying is pets offer you the ability to have what you would get to some degree from children, where you take care of another living being, you feel companionship at all times, you have an extra family member without any of the same amount of like necessary dedication.
I always love seeing those memes, where they're like, parents are asking me for a grandchild, and then here's the grandchild, and the person's holding up a cat in like a jumper or something. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think I'd be a one or the other kind of
No,
person.
I would probably
I'd love a pet, but I haven't gotten to the point in life where I'd even consider children yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Properly.
Yeah.
So, I'd love to have a pet, and I'd probably like just as much to have a kid at some point, but
Lawrence
I'm
would-
exactly the kind of person that gets one to like replace
Lawrence
the
would
other.
love to have a pet, but he would like to have a kid. You know what I'm saying?
I think where the distinction comes in is that we're just generally, our generation is having kids at an older age than our parents did. That's what it is,
Absolutely. Oh my gosh,
because
yes.
just financially we can't just settle down like our parents used to. And those memes are like, we're going to settle down and have a kid at 23, and then that's your parents, and then you're 23. I'm going to go to college and get a lot of debt and not know what to do with the rest of my life afterwards. That's basically what life is at right now.
My uncle was
and
married
I
with
mean,
kids.
with COVID,
Yeah, my uncle was
Exactly.
married with kids at like 21. So especially with
Right,
COVID,
yeah.
like as Lawrence was about to mention, we are just so behind, man. It just feels so behind.
yeah, it's like I've had a whole year where I haven't been able to really get a proper job with my degree because everything's closed. All the industries are
Right.
dead. It's terrible. So I'm even further behind now to being, financially stable enough to be like, oh yeah, right now, kid, let's
I
go.
mean, you're making
you've been trying.
You're making a podcast, You're making a podcast.
Yeah.
What can you say? But yeah, so again, we're kind of approaching the conclusion, so I just want to ask.
I'll tell you what I'll get, because I didn't mention what I'd get. I'd get a Shiba Inu just for the memes.
Ooh.
Oh boy, you know how much of a troublemaker those
They
dogs
are
are.
great. They're absolutely
Like that dog
great.
would mean you will never do another podcast with us because it won't let you.
I know, man. Tell me about it. I know someone who has one, but yeah, I wouldn't actually get one. I'm just saying it for the jokes.
So let's address the typical personality traits associated with each breed. Like, for example, we all mentioned how dogs tend to be more loving and more loyal, for example, than cats. That's the general stereotype.
I think that they're more warm outwardly. It's not that they're more loving or
Indeed.
loyal, because I had loads of cats back in Romania too, and they were just as they just as dependent on me and loving as my dogs. It's just they needed time away from me.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like cats are way more... You have to work for their affection. Like, you genuinely have to just like...
Yeah, they're reserved. I think
Yeah.
that's
Oh, yeah,
the best
yeah.
word.
They're absolutely
The introverts of the animal kingdom.
Indeed. Well, with the dogs, obviously, we all know everything. Just like, again,
Yeah.
dogs are like this symbol of loyalty, you know. Hachiko from Japan, you know, we all know the
Right.
story.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But, you know, it's just like, it's wonderful to see, man. It's wonderful to see every single
Would you say it's
animal.
because we've domesticated them for so long? They've evolved to be, you know, what they are. They've evolved to be loyal and, you know, just affectionate.
'cause
Yeah.
They feel just as like dependent on us as we do on
Absolutely.
them when we become attached. Like that's why, you know, the Hachiko story where like the dog would just guard, you know, its owner's grave
Absolutely.
for ever. That's like really sad and
Yeah.
tragic, but it's also like, look how much this dog loved this specific human.
Yeah.
To the point where it recognizes that no one else is going to replace that human to this
And we've
dog.
always used dogs through history, man. We've always used dogs for our benefit.
Absolutely.
You obviously have the canine forces and the police. You also
Yeah, like I mentioned, back on the farm, we had a canine as a guard
Exactly,
dog. It was
yeah.
there to
Yeah.
scare off like bad animals or like thieves, criminals.
And again, you have stuff like the Alaskan Malamute, which is obviously used for sleighs and just transports
Huskies,
in more than favorable, in less than favorable conditions, should I say? So they've always been
You also have like shepherding dogs,
absolutely.
which, you know, a lot of like breeds we adopt now that are fully domesticated, you can still see their shepherding traits.
Oh yeah,
Like
yeah.
I mentioned how I'd get a corgi. They used to be shepherd dogs. And you can tell because sometimes when you see someone who owns one, the dog is going to try to corral them into an area. Like it's going to bark and run around them and try to get them to go a certain way. It's like, yeah, that's because guess what? That's what those dogs used to do for like a
Yeah.
job.
And then the Saint Bernard comes up to you with free whiskey. It's a win-win.
Oh gosh, but yeah. So, do you guys have any points you would like to?
I actually,
Conclude on?
there's something funny we were talking about we brought it up in a group chat, but like we found out about the brain parasite you can get
Oh, yeah.
from
Oh
cats.
my gosh, yes.
Toxoplasma
Oh,
gondii
no.
or whatever, however it's called or pronounced. And that was just, to me, terrifying.
Where they just
'Cause it was
hijack
like
your brain.
50% of human beings already have it. I'm like, what? That's just like a funny thing we found while looking about, you know, pet stuff.
And somehow France has the highest number at 84% of pet owners have that parasite. And I'm thinking, what are they doing? What are they up to in France that they're getting such high numbers?
Yeah, but I read more into it, and it's fascinating why that parasite does what it does. You know how like it messes with the mind of whatever it infects to get them to like act certain ways. So apparently, because the cats is the only animal that can like pass it on through like breeding and having children. Because of that, the parasite has adapted to the point where it works in favor of the cat.
Yeah.
Like if a rat in an area where the cat is hunting in the wild gets it, it becomes harder for the rat to get away because its own mind is messing with it.
Wow.
So it's like this parasite has become so dependent on cats that it helps cats.
Jesus Christ.
That's a great parasite. Like, it's the best parasite since Venom.
Do you even call it a parasite at that point? If it's
I mean, to us it still is.
if it's genuinely helping you. But no, there is obviously the whole meme that cats are indeed our supreme overlords. And, you know,
Right.
I didn't actually want to...
There was a whole advertising campaign. What was it? Cravendale's cats with opposable thumbs.
Yeah,
I remember
that was the thing. I do want to also bring up the fact that, you know, we talked about the history of dogs, but if you want to look at the history of cats, we've been worshipping those guys since
Right.
Oh, yeah.
since the beginning of time. So.
Ancient Egypt.
No, you always see that meme where it's like, dude, look at it. It meowed. That's a
That's a
dog.
god. That's an actual god. So, you know.
Yeah.
So let's all just hell best it, and, you know.
Well, not me, because
Just Joe.
You know
okay.
why.
It's okay, bro.
Yes.
It's okay.
It's okay. You don't need to join our pagan ways. You're safe.
We praise the cat.
But yeah, no, obviously there's a reason that like even like this brings us to a thing where historically there's a reason that animals have played such a massive role, especially domesticated ones to us. It's not just as idols like the cats in Egypt, but it's you know, cats would help hunt mice,
Exactly.
and they were super necessary in times where rats would spread plagues and diseases, and the cat would take care of you in the house, and dogs, you know, have helped us from hunting to shepherding, like we mentioned, to everything.
Ah,
really.
yes, the other great plague. But, you know, all I'm saying is that if I could have a pet, like, I'm obviously so limited in my ability to have one from the place I live to financial reasons that I simply can't have a pet that I want right now. But you can be damned sure that I will get a pet the minute I'm able
Yeah,
to. So,
yeah, exactly. As soon
I
as you
love
can.
Yeah, I think if it came down to like if we want, I think all of three of us
absolutely,
would
brother.
want
Absolutely.
a pet.
Like, I genuinely think that some of the best thing you can do in your life is to own a pet. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm 100% confident that it will just improve you as a human being in all corners, bro. All corners.
I've dreamed about getting like a wolf hybrid and calling it like Beowulf.
Here we go. Game of Thrones again. Let's go.
Well, it's not even Game of Thrones. It's like Anglo-Saxon literature. It's
Yeah,
like
but
that's the first thing.
Yeah, but it's a direwolf, bro. Come on, it's a direwolf.
I know, right? I mean, if I get a like a direwolf dog, like those breeds that they had on the show, and then just call it Beowulf. I've imagined this so much when I was younger. Like someone would come to the door, like a postman or whatever, knock on the door, and then I open the door, and then Beowulf comes, and it's just this giant dog that just comes running into the door, jumping the postman, and I'm like, yeah, settle down, Beowulf. This good, his friends.
If I had a corgi, I'd name it something like Giant, just to make people have a hard time.
Little John.
Yeah, come here, Giant.
If I would have a pet, I would just call it Argo from a very near
a
dear,
man of culture.
from a very near and dear reference that we would discuss in future episodes. But
I'm sure we would.
It is a name very close to my heart.
Yes, I know.
We shall get to it eventually. So I think that's a good place to end it. I genuinely think that final thoughts. Any final thoughts you guys have?
Yeah.
I mean, just pets are a joy and a gift, and anyone would probably want them if they could. And, they're just great. Absolutely. Yeah, I love animals.
And obviously, I do think that if you do get... It's a responsibility, people. Let's not lie to ourselves. It's an absolute responsibility that you take towards that creature to take care of, cherish, and love, and make sure that it has a wonderful life. Do not just get a pet if you plan on abandoning it in a few months' time, because... For you, like, I'm gonna quote, that's a horrible picture which I've seen everywhere, but it's actually quite true. For you, it's a few years, but for them, it's a lifetime. So, just don't be a dick towards your animals. And abandon all ritualistic, horrible practices behind you horrible human beings in Bulgaria. Anyways.
Yes, please no sacrificing goats to Odin.
He's had enough, bro.
He's just gorged himself on goats, it's enough.
But yes.
And in the words of Major Biden... woof, 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 woof.
This has been Faffing with Friends. I have been Ivaylo.
I have been Lawrence, the pet lover animal extraordinaire.
And I have been Woof.
Jesus Christ.
See you guys next time.
See you guys next time.